can't wait for next Tuesday to come and go so I can get back to just thinking about books, I hope, and getting back to reading. Hello and welcome back to Bookish, and welcome to my October wrap-up and my November TBR pile of possibilities. So I am more or less strictly going to be talking about books in this video, and I'll leave timestamps so you can navigate around the various parts of the video. So, you know, I look forward to October every year. I like Victober in part because I kind of skipped a lot of classics, English literary classics, in my reading before I got to be around the age I am now. And this is just a really good way to remind myself and to kind of program myself to read some of those books. And so I had a more ambitious kind of TBR for Victober picked out, but then I went into a slump, reading slump of sorts in October, and I decided to just kind of embrace the slump and just to go with it. So I only read two books for Victober, and I only read two other books all month, so that meant my total number of books read for October was 2. So the 2 Victorian books I read, one was The Last Chronicle of Barset. I made a whole video about the Chronicles of Barset, and I'll leave a link to that at the end. The Last Chronicle of Barset, as the name implies, is the book that kind of wraps up the 6-book series, and it does it in a really brilliant way, I think, in which we kind of get to revisit almost all of the characters in one way or another and get some kind of ending, not always a happy, not always a tragic ending to all their stories. And I think it was just really brilliantly done, and I really enjoyed it. Now, I started off trying to read this as an ebook, and you know, because of the slumpiness, I only got about 100 pages in, I think, as an ebook, and then I listened to it as an audiobook. So that's kind of how I completed the book, and that worked really well for me. It worked so well for me that it also is kind of how I read or got through the second book that I chose for Victober, and that was The Netherworld by George Gissing. Now, I've said on my channel several times, I think Gissing is my favorite Victorian author, but I was watching Katie from Books and Things. She's going through Victorian authors and talking about themselves and their work, and she got to Gissing, and she called Gissing the urban Thomas Hardy, in that he oftentimes wrote books that were really grim, in which really depressing and sad things happened. And that's becoming increasingly obvious as I go on. The first Gissing I read was The Odd Women, and you know, it had a not happy ending, but it wasn't all that grim. Then I read New Grub Street, which ends grimly, but you know, there were characters in the book who, you know, I thought were okay, and I thought the story was really kind of compelling, probably because it involved writers. This year I read The Netherworld, and The Netherworld is set among incredibly poor people in an incredibly poor, downtrodden, crime-heavy, drinking problem area of London among really poor people. And really what we look at is different levels of poverty. It's very much involved with social class, but here in this book, there aren't people who are from the upper social classes. There aren't people who would be considered necessarily to be gentlemen in the Victorian England sense of the word. Instead, it kind of focuses on a few people. Jane Snowdon, who when we meet her, is essentially a servant girl who is abused by the daughter of the woman who she lives with and works for. We meet the Hewitt family, which is just beset by poverty and tragedy. And essentially, I don't think there's anything positive that comes from their story necessarily. We meet the oldest son, I believe his name is Robert Hewitt, and his wife, who's referred to as Pennyloaf, even though her name is Penelope, who, you know, very, very poor, and he felt like he was doing her such a favor by marrying her. We see them and kind of the tragic ends that their lives come to. Sorry if these are spoilers, but, you know, I told you, Gissing, or I repeated Katie's line about Gissing being the urban Thomas Hardy. And then we meet the Snowdons, and we meet a character named Sydney, who is kind of the main male character of the book. And essentially, through pride, the greed of others, the avarice of others, the evil of others, you know, essentially these people never rise above the status they're in. And the best they can hope for is to come to peace with, or come to grips with, the poverty and tragedy that surrounds their lives. And so there's not a lot of uplift in this book. There's not a lot of happiness in the book. And I am kind of one of those people who I don't have to have a happy ending. I don't have to have books be happy or pleasant. I don't have to have even any of the characters necessarily have a happy ending. But this book is just really unremittingly grim. And that doesn't mean it isn't an excellent book. It doesn't mean I didn't appreciate it for what it was. But here I think we see Gissing making a real point about social class and poverty. And it's not just a point where, Gissing is saying, look what's happening to the poor and what society's doing to the poor. He also kind of makes it clear that there are some problems that the poor bring upon themselves, and that the society in which the poor live causes them to behave perhaps in certain ways which are unethical and immoral. Anyway, that was my second book that I read for Victober. The other two books I read have nothing to do with Victober. One, again, is a book I've already reviewed and talked about on this channel, and that's The Safekeep by Yael van der Wouden. And this is a book that is on the Booker Prize shortlist, I believe, and I was able to get a copy of it, and that's from my library, and I was able to read it, and I thought it was good. I thought it was really good. Of the books that are on the short list, other than James, I would probably rank it as my second favorite that's on that list. I definitely think it's worthy, and if you've seen people's Booker video reactions, you know that is kind of a rare thing. And then the last book I read this month was the new book from Louise Erdrich, and that is The Mighty Red. And like everybody else, I wish this Genesis Book Club sticker wasn't on the front of my book, but there it is. I can't do anything about it. And so I read The Mighty Red by Louise Erdrich because she's one of my favorite writers. And what I found is, I think, what you would expect to find in a Louise Erdrich novel. It is a novel set on, near, adjacent to Native American land. It involves discussion of the use of that land, the takeover of that land by white people, the loss of that land by indigenous or First Nations people, the relationships that exist between those two different groups of people, and how they're worked out, and how the trauma exists. And then it revolves around what I think of as kind of fairly classical Louise Erdrich characters who are, for lack of a better word, quirky, unusual, unique might be a way of putting them. And primarily the story revolves around two women, one named Crystal and her daughter who's named Kismet. And those two characters are the main characters. They have an incredibly close and really great relationship with one another, which is really one of the things I thought was best about the book, showing a positive mother-daughter relationship. Even though the daughter doesn't always do what the mother would want her to do, and there are, moments of tension, but, it is a loving, positive relationship. So the two storylines in the book kind of involve those two different characters. One, and the more serious of the storylines, because it involves a tragedy that we learn about and is hinted at as you go through the book, involves Kismet and her love life. The man she marries, the man she loves, her relationship with her husband's family and their history and their connection to her family, and her husband's connection to his friends and to what's going on in this community. There's a lot of focus on farming, and this is one of the places where I think the book is just a trifle heavy-handed in kind of pointing out the way in which the land is being misused and abused by white farmers farming in a corporate way in this community. It's sugar beets that they're farming, from which sugar is refined, and how the use of pesticides is affecting the land. And there's not a whole lot about that. It's not like I'm talking about Anna Karenina and Tolstoy's long discussions about farming there, but there is some of it there, and at times you feel, I believe, Erdrich's presence there, telling us and teaching us a lesson about the use of land, which is not terrible. It doesn't ruin the book, but that's kind of revolves around Kismet's story, and mainly it's about her marriage to Gary and her love for, I forgot the other young man's name now because I'm really bad at names, but it's about that, and then her relationship with her mother. And then the second storyline, which is in the end, I think a lot funnier and a lot more amusing and enjoyable in lots of ways is Crystal's relationship with her husband. And I won't go into any kind of details of what happens there, but suffice to say that it is not a normal relationship. It doesn't proceed down a direct path. It may not work out very well, but there is some humor and real interesting stuff involved there. And I found the book to be enjoyable. Do I think it's one of Louise Erdrich's best books? You know, I wouldn't put it on the same level as I would put The Sentence or The Night Watchman, or certainly Plague of Doves or The Round House, or Tracks, or those other books, or even Love Medicine, but it's a good book. And if you like Louise Erdrich's writing and her books, I think this is definitely a book you should read. So there you go. There is my wrap up for my relatively meager reading in October. And now a word from our sponsors. So this month is NonFiction November, and I just want to make a recommendation to you for a nonfiction book. And this video is sponsored by me and my book, MacArthur's Bloody Butchers. So as everybody knows, Olive does a great job every year, and this is her last year, of setting up NonFiction November and coming up with prompts for NonFiction November. And my book, MacArthur's Bloody Butchers, which is about Company G of the 163rd Regiment of the 41st Infantry and the war they fought in the Pacific between 1942 and 1945. My book covers all of the 4 prompts. So you could use my book for any of the 4 prompts. Code, we're talking about the military, so there's a military code of ethics. Path, the Company G spent a lot of time in the jungle following paths and blazing paths. Shot, well, obviously we're talking about a military history. There's a lot of shooting that goes on. And then join, that works for the military too, because all 4 of the men that my book focuses on join the military, whether voluntarily or, you know, through the draft. They all join the military. So MacArthur's Bloody Butchers is a military history. We do follow this military unit from one place to another and talk about the military engagements they were involved in. But at the same time, I hope it is a look at these 4 soldiers and bring some humanity to that discussion. Those 4 soldiers, there are stories of romance and tragedy and friendship. There's humor, funny things happen, and I think that the story of those 4 men is really entertaining. The book is available in hardback. You can find it from any online bookseller, and you can also get it directly from the publisher. I'll leave a link, affiliate link to bookshop.org down in the show notes. It's also available in every electronic book form, not just Kindle, not just Kobo, but others, for a price that's about 1/3 of the hardback price. So if you're looking for a book, to fill out your NonFiction November TBR, there you go. And now back to the video where I talk about what I'm going to read for NonFiction November. Now I got a little bit of a head start on NonFiction November, and I want to mention the audiobook I'm listening to first, because if I don't, I'll forget it. So the audiobook I'm listening to, oddly, since Victober's over, is Charles Dickens' A Life by biographer Claire Tomalin. I started listening to that because I had run out of things to listen to while I was walking, and I found this biography on through the Libby app connected to my library. I started listening to it, and so that will be for sure a book I complete. And then I kind of went crazy buying books for NonFiction November this month, because a lot of books have came out. They're nonfiction books that I really want to read. So the first one of those books I want to mention is this biography of John Lewis, A Life by David Greenberg. If you watch my channel for any period of time, you would know that John Lewis is a hero of mine. The youngest of the civil rights leaders who, and I don't mean this to sound like I'm demeaning Martin Luther King Jr. in any way, but unlike King, he tried to cross the bridge in Selma before they had federal marshals there protecting him. And he had his skull cracked as a result. Unlike King, he was actually a freedom rider and was beaten up several times while trying to integrate bus stops in the South. He was a victim of violence while trying to integrate movie theaters in, I believe, Nashville, where he was going to college. He spoke at the March on Washington in 1963, and he gave one of the speeches before King's I Have a Dream speech. If you have never listened to that speech, you should listen to it. And I believe he was only 23 years old at the time. He was an important civil rights leader. He then ran for Congress, was in Congress as a congressman from Georgia for a long period of time, and sponsored and pushed for lots of civil rights and other legislation to help all Americans. And like I said, just a real hero of mine. And this qualifies for the prompt of path, because Lewis was a leader on the path to civil rights, and he also, there's an illustrated series of books about Lewis's life that are called March, and so I think that qualifies for path. So the second book on my list, and this is the book I've already started reading, and that is Black AF History, The Unwhitewashed Story of America by Michael Harriot. This book is the book I am using for, what I'm using it for, it's for shot, because in this book Michael Harriot takes shots at traditional views of American history and major events in American history, and it's kind of set up like it's supposed to be a textbook. After every chapter there's sections that are called supplements. If you remember your old history textbook, it had those like extra reading things. At the end of each chapter there are questions and activities like you would find at the end of a textbook, and it is irreverent but really sharp and really biting, and I'm enjoying it. I'm really not that far in, but I'm looking forward to finishing that. The next book on my list is Bird by Bird, the well-known by now book about advice about writing and life, it says down here, by Anne Lamot. Got to check this book out from the library just today, and I'm using this book for code because it, kind of talks about the code for writers and writing, I think. Anyway, that may be a bit of a stretch, but there you go. I'm looking forward to getting to that book. And then I bought two new books. Well, actually, this would be the third book I bought for NonFiction November, and that's Henry V by Dan Jones. It's called The Astonishing Triumph of England's Greatest Warrior King. I saw that this book came out some time ago, and I'd forgotten about it, and I intended to get it and read it because Henry V is my favorite Shakespeare play. And so I'm looking forward to getting to this, even though, having said that, my NonFiction November TBR is pretty ambitious. And if there's one book I probably don't get to, it will probably be this one, but then I can get to it in December. I'm using this book to cover the prompt join, because of Henry V's favorite speech in Shakespeare. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers, for he who sheds blood today with me shall be my brother, and so on. And so I think of that kind of as joining, and maybe that doesn't work, but I think it does, and that's all that really matters. And then the other book I bought today was Ta-Nehisi Coates' new book, The Message, which is essentially kind of essays that Coates was inspired to write by his trips to Senegal in Africa, Columbia, South Carolina, and to Palestine. And so this is, Ta-Nehisi Coates' book, Between the World and Me, is one of my favorite nonfiction books, and so I'm really looking forward to getting to this book as well. It's not very short. I opened it. It's not very long. I opened it. The print's kind of small, so I'm a little worried. But other than that, I think that's it for right now. There might be one more book that I try to sneak in as one of my options for NonFiction November. I also am hoping to get to read Fire Exit, a novel by Morgan Talty, who is the author of Night of the Living Res, a collection of connected short stories which I really liked. I'd like to get to this book and read it this month in November as well. Anyway, so there you go. There is my November TBR pile of possibilities. The first part of this was my wrap-up for October. Have anything to say, any thoughts, ideas about any of the books I've mentioned? If you read any of them, please leave any comments you have in the comment section below. And as always, thank you for watching.